Shahari before the Shiur. Yeah. Okay, right. What's the sim?
The season.
I've got a new thing now. I'll wait till the end and see who's messaging me.
Shahari before the Shiur. Yeah. Okay, right. Sim.
What's the new thing? I'll wait till the end of the campaign and then I go. Why? Once I know people have stopped. Otherwise, you give something wrong with It is mine. Be nice. By the way.
I didn't know it was over yours.
It was mine while I was being upset. I was looking after it.
I see you've made supplies for a long dap and a half.
I know, but very hard.
You can't take 1.5 dap today, so.
Crack from the pickle. Crack from the pickle.
Surely not like
Yes. You know, we should invite to this party. Your boss.
Running. It's definitely.
what's all the whiskey about? I've got a kugel and then it's man whiskey.
You're very big into
What's the word? Very clever.
I'm sorry, everybody's here is partying while David and Yehuda. I wish you a very good work.
You shouldn't be so scared of COVID.
What's COVID?
Good work. Come here. I don't know why we're all eating. I'm not sure what the occasion is.
Whiskey, so when I kugel that whiskey.
The wife's not watching. The wife's not watching.
Oh, it's not.
No. It's not just watching yourself on the camera. Yes.
What happened to Trump today?
He's the president.
He's the president.
Running in the back of the road, never lost.
Yes, sir.
Still alive.
Right. Okay. Good work, everybody. Don't eat and eat and eat. But make sure the food's somewhere where it's more accessible. And that's not so accessible. They put on the back row there, next to the.
Yeah, I got another one on Friday. Sorry, I forgot.
Which you might be able to learn between the food.
Okay, I have to tell you, tonight's staff, which we're not even going to start for the next half an hour because we've got a lot to do to get there, is I found, shall I say this? I don't know if I should. It is one of the challenging days.
Don't worry, you keep on saying that.
I know.
You always say it's a hard.
I know. I should have said that. Omar Rab, we're up to Ein Bob on Aleph, bottom line, actually top of our Ein Bob on the base. Omar Rab. Basal shchuto, if a person's got kosher slaughtered meat, shomin, which is fatty. The Mechaber actually discusses what's considered fatty meat. It's a bit too much of a topic to discuss now, but not all meat is fatty. It's got fat side. Shetzolo, you roast it to bosom the veda with treif for meat kochush, which is not fatty. Also, this question halacha comes up so many times. A person goes and he bakes in a meaty oven a milky cheesecake. I can't imagine how many times this shaila comes up all the time. We're not talking about exactly the same case. Let's get the case clear. You've got a big fire, big oven, and you take 2 kebabs. And one of them is treif meat, and the other one is kosher meat. Are they touching each other? No. So what's the issa? Rav says it is awesome. My tama. The fatmi mehadodi, the smell gets absorbed one from the other. And Rashi points out the Rav is being very machmir because which meat is fat? The kosher meat. And the rule is that only fatty meat can spread the taste. So we don't care if the fatty meat spreads. Answer, the fatty meat spreads its pleasures onto the onto the non-fat meat,
Rebound.
and then it rebounds. Very good. Even if the kosher one is not fat, which is fat, mutter, it is mutter. My time is only smell. The smell is nothing. Somebody was roasting a chazah and a goat in the same oven, and Levi permitted it. Right, say a little bit of halacha l'maisa. Rav and Levi, it's a machlokas amoyroy. Rashi tells us we paskin like Levi, even though generally speaking we paskin like Rav. Here we paskin like Levi. Rashi proves this from the Gemara and Avodah Zarah. And he says that his Rebbe also told that to him. It's the first of the wide lines of Rashi. Tosfos l'maisa paskins like Rav. Look at the third Tosfos on the page. Also, so it's a machlokas amoyroim and the machlokas rishonim who to paskin like. To make things slightly more, you have to be aware of one or two things. Tosfos holds that even Levi only permitted b'diavad, not lechatchila. Right. Furthermore, we only talk about fatty meat. If it's not fatty meat, there's not a problem. And fourth of all, what's very important is we're talking about a small oven. A big oven is not a problem. So 99% of cases, most Rishonim passing like Rashi, not like Tosfos. In most cases, like this. This is the famous halacha. If you take in the same oven, you've got meat. Let's say you're cooking your meat for Shabbos, and in the same oven you put in a challah, and then the challah you want to dip it into your coffee. Mutter or asa? Why? Why do you say asa?
You can't have it with the coffee.
According to Tosfos, it is asa lechatchila. According to Levi, Rashi doesn't say that. Rashi's mashma that even lechatchila it is mutter. But then you have to remember, it's only if the meat is a fatty meat, and only if there's meat in the oven at the same time as the challah. Many times you get people, they say, it's a meaty cake. What they mean is they baked it in the meaty oven. One can argue. First of all,
It's only in the same meal as well.
only if you dip the bread into milk. If you eat the same meal, it's okay.
Well, you can have it with
with coffee.
In the meal.
No, with the coffee.
Yeah, so you don't dip the bread into coffee.
It's not the same meal you should have.
No, we pass it only if you're dipping it.
Chips which were cooked in a...
Not about cooked, what about baked. We're talking about baked in the oven. It's different from blias. This is not the same as blias. If you talk about ovens which are cooked in the meaty pot, that's more of a problem. Here we talk about baked in the oven. So again, achlukas amoyroim with the veicha milsa, achlukas rishonim with the passing of the kvav or like Levi. Achlukas rishonim again, very very briefly. Achlukas amoyroim with the veicha milsa or not. Achlukas rishonim who we pass like. Achlukas rishonim whether lechatchila it's also according to everybody. And furthermore, you've got a shaila, is it really fatty meat? And whether it's considered a small oven. And Mechaber says a big oven is mutter even according to Rav. Now we're just going to go through very quickly. Meisve. You can't roast two korbanos Pesach next to each other because of the mixture. Let's say me and Chaim have got korban Pesach. We roast it next to each other. The smell of his goes into mine, the smell of mine goes into his. Now the halacha is every korban Pesach is only allowed to be eaten by the designated group. If we roast it next to each other, when I'm eating my korban Pesach, I'm eating partly his. And that's no good. It's a raya to who? Who's a raya to? Rav. Very good. V'kasha leLevi. Look, we're scared that if we roast the two together, what will happen is I'll end up eating his, he'll end up eating mine, not because of the smell. We'll actually mix up the korban Pesach. There are hundreds of thousands of korban Pesach all being roasted next to each other. Before you know it, I'll be eating his. What's wrong if I eat his? It wasn't the one which I was designated. It says, that's pshat in the halacha. Even if one's a goat and one's a sheep. Again, the halacha is you're not allowed to roast two korban Pesach next to each other, even if one's a goat and one's a sheep. Now the question is like this: if the problem is because of the smell, it makes no difference if it's a sheep and a goat and a sheep. What's the difference? If the problem is the smell, like Rav, then it makes no difference if it's a sheep and a goat and the sheep. Both have the smell will go into each other. But if the problem is because we might mix them up, and I might end up eating his and then end up eating mine. If his is a goat and mine's a sheep, it's very unlikely we'll mix it up because I remember mine was a sheep and yours was a goat. Is a raya that what's the problem over here? No. What's the problem over here? If we're mixing up, not the smell. Okay. That even the sheep and the goat are not allowed to. Why even the sheep and the goat are not allowed to? Oh, no, because we're scared that with so many different corners Pesach, you will get mixed up. Yeah, you'll forget. But the fact that you had to say even shows that the problem over here is not the problem of the smell, is the problem of the mixture. Because if the problem is only the smell, you wouldn't need to say the word even, because there's make no difference between sheep and goats and sheep. Again, the problem is because you might mix up the actual body of the animal. That's why we mentioned even the goat and the sheep. But if you say the problem is because of the mixture of the smells, what difference does it make? If the problem is like Rav, that if you roast it next to each other, the smells will intermingle. So why do you have to say even the goat and sheep? Even the sheep and sheep is also. Says the Gemara, Elamai. It must be like Levi that what? That what's the problem? The mixture of the bodies, but the mixture of the smells we're not caring about. So again, so it's a kasha Rav. According to Rav, that the problem is the smell. So why do you have to say even sheep and goat? According to him, the problem should be sheep and sheep. Says the Gemara, we're talking about you cook it in two separate pots, and there's no problem with smell. The problem with smell is only when you roast it, and that's another halacha, by the way, the oven. If you bake a cake and a meat in the same oven, but they're both covered, it's not a problem. It's only if they're both revealed, right? It's only when they're both open air is a problem. Says the Gemara, are you allowed to roast the Korban Pesach in a pot? We've learned again and again and again that the way you roast the Korban Pesach is open fire. So the Gemara says, so all we mean is like this. You take two Korbanos Pesach and you make a pile of ashes between the two Korbanos Pesach and you roast them side by side. So there's no mixture of smells because you've got the ashes in between. My taruvas tamim. Again, according to Levi, the whole problem is only because of mixture of the bodies, and that's why we have to mention even sheep and goats. According to Rav, first we start off with the mixture of the smells, and then we say that that's no good. And even if you can avoid the smells, how can you avoid the smells? By making a pile of ashes separate. So it's like two separate pots. Even so, it's also because of the fact that you might mix up the bodies. Okay, so we've got Machlekes, Rav, and Levi. Are we concerned about the smell? You've got a bowl of tuma, and it's hot. You put on it bread, hot bread. What's the problem if you put hot bread on a bowl of tuma? That the smell of the wine of the truma will be soaked into the bread. So Amir Oisei forbids it for Yisroel. The Kohen's allowed to eat it. Rabbi Yehuda Mati. Rabbi Yossi Mati b'shalchita b'oisei b'shes. Barley absorbs the smell much more than wheat. They shall to draw in the smell. My love tanoi. The mass of Eichelav Nilsi, mass of Eichelsi. The Machlik Zavanim is Machlik Sanoi. As to whether we're concerned about smell, because over here, when you put a loaf of bread on top of a barrel of wine, there's no blias, there's no cooking together, the whole thing smells. So it says like this. Levi bade tanoi. According to Levi, of course, Machlik Sanoi. Rav name tanoi. Let's say it's Machlik Sanoi. Omar lo Rav de Kulam Eichelsi. Everybody agrees that smell is a problem. Everybody agrees if it's a hot bread and an open barrel, it is awesome. The pasuk cold bread and a closed barrel, and you're putting the bread on top of the closed barrel. You've got a closed barrel with a hot bread, or open barrel with the cold bread. This is like hot bread with an open barrel. Again, let's get it clear. Rav will say to you, everybody agrees that smell is a problem. But the question over here is whether there is a smell, because we're not talking about a normal situation. We're talking about a situation where either it is a closed barrel with hot bread or an open barrel with cold bread. So the machlokes tanoim is, in such a case, does the smell permeate into the bread or not? But if the smell would, everybody agrees it is awesome. Bread, we should cook it with a roast in an oven. You're not allowed to eat it with kutach. Why not allowed to eat it with kutach? Milk. There was a fish, the that they roasted next to meat. Also, So he forbade people to eat the fish with milk. Why did he forbid people to eat the fish with milk? Because it was roasted with meat. Meat and fish that cooked together is awesome. It causes saras and bad smell. You're not allowed to eat fish cooked in a meaty pot. Do you know that? You're not allowed to eat. Actually, I say very briefly, I don't really got time, but once I had a baby on Friday afternoon, literally an hour before Shabbos. What happened was that we were living in Kiryat for the time, the baby was born in Yerushalayim. So kids and all the food that kids and my wife had made that week, gefilte fish. For some reason I thought it was kishka. So I wrapped it in silver foil and put it in the freezer. And what happened was the next week I put the gefilte fish in the cholent to add a flavor to the cholent. Shabbos morning we opened it up. We couldn't eat the cholent and we couldn't eat the fish. Nothing. Blias. No, because it was wrapped in silver foil, only limited silver foil. So therefore it was proper blias, we couldn't eat any of it. Because sakana, yeah, because sakana. That's what I just said over here. No, sakana was very, very machmir. There is a Pesachim Tshuva in Yehuda that says you're not allowed to eat fish with milk either. I was once by a Talmid Chacham, and he was eating smoked salmon on a roll, and he had put butter on the roll. I said, what about the Pesachim Tshuva? So he says, nobody is choshesh for this Pesachim Tshuva at all, and therefore you don't need to be choshesh for it.
Yeah,
A bitch don't allow it, I'd be surprised.
don't allow us.
I think they do.
I don't think I can have tuna
I just want to point out, Rashi, let's just see. I just want to read out Rashi. Okay. Rashi, 5 lines from the end of the thin lines. I want to read out Rashi. Even though if you work it out, most of the time hold like Rav, the lady. So if you go by he says Allah is like lady. Now Rashi's got a problem. If he passes like Levi, then these Gemaras, which we just learned over here, that said that bread that you cooked in the meaty oven you can't eat with kutach, which is milk, what's going on? Rashi just passed it like Levi that Veichelav Nilsi. So Rashi himself mentions it, Mabish K'dech Agav. He said, that this later Gemara argues to the previous Gemara. But Tosfos says it's not a right because the answer is, not Tosfos, it is in Avodah Zarah, right? So he says that the reason is that Lechatchila it is awesome. And there he differentiates between what with the Eved and Lechatchila. I mean, Lechatchila to take bread which was roasted next to meat and to eat it with milk, that is awesome. And if you look in our Tosfos, the third Tosfos down, Tosfos says, since they're covered. So if you're allowed to have, if it's covered, can take those. And he says, if there's got space for the steam to spread, it's not a problem. So you see there's a few colors over here, but again, we've got a few, this is halacha l'maisa regarding meat and okay. Meat and fish. So meat and fish is also. Fish and milk, Pesachim Tshuva says it's also. We don't pass like Pesachim Tshuva. And meat and milk is definitely also. And then, but baking them in the same oven, so of course the chatchilet is definitely also. The shayla is but the evidence in such a case what to do. Okay. Says the Mishnah. Chamisha devorin boin betumah v'necholin betumah. There are 5 things that you're allowed to bring it betumah, but they can't be eaten betumah. Meaning like this. That we said already Pesach is a tumah hutov b'tzibur regarding Pesach. So if the majority of Klal Yisrael are tamei, what do? We shech the Korban Pesach even if the Kohanim are tamei. But there are 5 other things which have the same halacha, but one difference is that Korban Pesach, when it's brought betumah, it is shechted betumah and eaten betumah. All other korbanos, they are shechted betumah, but you don't eat them, you destroy them. If you remember, we learned what else besides Korban Pesach is brought betumah. Anybody remember? At the beginning of the previous period. Tomid Nishchat did have it. But Moyadoi, Korban Tomid is bought betumah. It's not eaten. Okay. So these are the Oima, the Korban Oima which is bought second day Pesach, Shtei Lechem which is bought on Shavuos, V'Lechem Apon which is bought every Shabbos. The Zivchei Shamei Tzibur. What's Zivchei Shamei Tzibur? When do we bring Zivchei Shamei Tzibur? No, don't bring Zivchei. Maybe you're not listening. It's one of your favorite things. Doesn't matter. Zivch Shabbat Tzivu. When do we Zivch Shabbat Tzivu? Shavuos. Bring on Shavuos. Oh. The Seivim Rosh Chodoshim and every Rosh Chodesh when you bring the Seivim, all those are you shechted betumah, but they're not eaten betumah. Ha Pesach Shvo betumah, Necha betumah Shvo b'tchilas le'achila. Oh, so here we learn like this. The exception to the rule is korban Pesach is the only korban which is eaten betumah. All other korbanos, for example, Tomid, what will you do? If you're all Tomid and Mashiach comes, what will we do? We'll shecht it, we will not eat it. Okay.
What happens to
Right, so you must remember, korban Tomid really goes on the Mizbeach. So that's what the Gemara is going to discuss, what happens to the rest of the korban Tomid. But let's say, for example, we'll see, the Gemara discusses exactly what we do with it. So now the Gemara asks, 5, what's coming to exclude? There's a special korban. What are the 3 korbanos that you have to bring every Yom to Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot? Chagiga, what's called? Shalmei Chagiga. Shalmei Simcha and Olas Ve'ir. Let's go very briefly. Olas Ve'ir is a special korban. It's this week's Parashah Mishpatim. Shalmei Simcha, because you've got to eat. For so machta b'chagecha, you have to be happy. Shalmei Chagiga, Sholosh Pon B'Shana Tochei Gli B'Shana Tochei means bring me a korban. So Chagigas Chamishasa, you have to bring it on Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, but you can't bring it betumah. Can anybody guess why?
You won't be coming to Pesach.
No, or tomorrow to Tzibur. The answer is because Chagigas Chamishas can be bought for 7 days. Since it can be bought any day, so therefore it's not pushing away again. You might have thought you have to bring it in Yom Tov. Okay, so our Mishnah says 5. What's the 5 coming to exclude Chagigas Chamishas? So, for example, if Mashiach was to come on Erev Pesach, they say, all Tomei, we will bring the Korban Pesach. We will bring the Korban Tomit. We will bring the Korban Musaf of Pesach. We will not bring Shalmei Chagiga on Pesach. And of course, we will not bring, by the way, Shalmei Simcha and Olas Ve'ir. We should mention every Yom Tov you bring Se'ivim, that they should also be bought with Tumah. And so, what are they? Already mentioned the Shalmei Tzibur, so of course, it's bought with Tumah. Says, why does the Mishnah say? Mishnah says 5 categories. What are the 5 categories? There's korbanos of Shavuos and Rosh Chodesh. Why Shavuos and Rosh Chodesh? What about all the other Yomim Tovim? So the Moshe says that all the other Yomim Tovim we learn from Shavuos. Furthermore, if we learn all the Yomim Tovim from Shavuos, why mention Rosh Chodesh? Answers the Gemara again. Bottom line. Says the Gemara in today's daf. Rosh Chodesh is a special Chiddush. We're going to learn the halacha is that every korban that's bought on Yom Tov or Shabbos is doicha 2 things. What's it doicha? Shabbos and Tumah. How do you learn it from Gzei Shava Moyadoi? The Torah never refers to Rosh Chodesh as Moyed. Since the Torah never refers to Rosh Chodesh as Moyed, so maybe it doesn't have the halacha that it should be doicha Shabbos or Tumah. Komash Malon that it does. Komash Malon do Rosh Chodesh ikri Moyed. Where do we see the Rosh Chodesh ikri Moyed? Kedar Abai. Omar Abai. Tammuz Daishat B'Loi Mali. Very, very briefly. Usually we have every second month is 30 days, and every second month is 29 days. Under normal circumstances, Tammuz of the year they came out to Mitzrayim should have been of 29 days. Why? Because Nisan is 30, Iyar is 29, Sivan is 30, Tammuz is 29. If that would have been the case, the Meraglim that went for 40 days, which day would they have come back? They would have come back on Tisha B'Av, and when the Yidden would have cried, it would have already been the night of the 10th of Av. The Akshpoch wanted Kaisel to cry on Tisha B'Av, so to speak, because that day was miyuad for Poronos. So the Pasuk says, Tammuz Tammuz of that particular year that they came out to Mitzrayim, the year after they came out to Mitzrayim, so Miluye Malye, they made it an extra day, 30 days. Hashem arranged that Tammuz that year should be 30 days in order that they should come out, that the Meraglim should come on the 8th of Av, so that when Klal Yisrael should cry, it should be the 9th of Av. So Hashem called it a Moyed. He made Rosh Chodesh an extra day, 2 days Rosh Chodesh, 11 Rosh Chodesh is 30 days, like this month it's going to be 2 days Rosh Chodesh because it's extra day. in order to break us. So therefore we see a remez that Rosh Chodesh is called Moed, so therefore it is Derech Shabbos and Tumah. So again, if Rosh Chodesh falls on Shabbos, would you bring the Musafir of Rosh Chodesh on Shabbos? Rosh Chodesh this year, Mashiach comes before this Shabbos. Will we bring, why? In one way is there Moed. Oh, Kolai Moed, Lishbe Bachur, that Hashem made Tammuz an extra month of Rosh Chodesh to break up. Now the Gemara is going to prove that all the Yomim Tovim, including Oima and Shtei Alechem, is Derech Shabbos and Derech Tumah. Very easy. Remember the Kulim in Moed also. We learn from Moed. We're not in a minute. Tonu Abon on Adav Moshe Moed Hashem. Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu with Parshas Emoy all the Yomim Tovim, and then what happens is, so not in it's Parshas Emoy. So it isn't Parshas Emoy. It tells them all the Yomim Tovim, and Moshe Rabbeinu tells it to Klal Yisrael. What's the possibility to say by Dabe Moshe Moed Hashem Matamud Loima? לפי שלמדנו לתלמוד פסח שנאמר בו במוידו במוידו ואפילו בשבוס במוידו ואפילו בתומו. שאר כבוד הסיבור מניין שנאמר, the answer is, תלמוד לימה אלה תעשו להשם במוידיכם. The Torah calls all the Yomim Tovim moyadechem to teach you that every single korban of Yom Tov pushes away Shabbos. Minayin Rabbis Omer v'akov imoy shtei alechem v'akov imoy tamudim avda b'Moshe Moed Hashem of the Yisroel akosov k'imoy dechad kolom. So we have various places the Torah calls Moed. Rosh Chodesh it says Kolai Moed. Omer and Shtei Alechem is a pasuk in Parshas Pinchas. The Torah calls it V'adav Hashem as Moed Hashem. In Parshas Emoy, you got another pasuk. So the Maisa, the Torah refers to every single Yom Tov, Pesach, Shiur, Sukkot, even the Omer Shtei Alechem and the Lechem. All of it is considered what? Moed. Since they're all called Moed, and we know that the word Moed teaches you afilu b'Shabbos, afilu b'Tumah. So therefore, every korban of Yom Tov. So, for example, let's say Pesach was to be on a Friday. The first day Chol HaMoed would be a Shabbos. Are you allowed to harvest the Omer on Shabbos? Yes, we do. We do a cut. We cut the Omer. We bring the Omer even on Shabbos. Can you imagine such a thing? We bring the lechem upon him even on Shabbos. Every Shabbos actually lechem upon him on Shabbos. So, for example, what do they do with the lechem upon him? Anybody know? Ate it. So where's the Chilul Shabbos in the lechem upon him if you're going to eat it? No, they baked it always on Friday. We learned that earlier. They baked it on Friday. So where's the Chilul Shabbos? Oh, they put 2 spoons of the levoina of the lechem upon him. If we already talk about it, Kedai to get it clear all 5. What's the Chilul Shabbos? The Omer, they would have to be makiv on the Mizbeach. The Shtei Alechem, what did they do with the Shtei Alechem? The Shtei Alechem, they gave it, as far as remember, to the Kohanim to eat. We'll see. Rashi talks about it. Okay. And then, we'll see. Okay. So the Maisa, we have all 5 is Derech Shabbos on some level, and we learn it all from Moyadechem. So I've slipped my mind what happens to the Shtei Alechem. Says the Gemara, V'chol ani normally. What asks the question, why do you need to have so many times the Torah says Moyadechem? Why so many times? I mean, if the Torah would have just said, let's say, Korban Tomid is Derech Shabbos, I would have said, if Tomid is Derech Shabbos, who had din? Pesach. Or if the Torah would have said Pesach, I would have said, similarly Tomid. Or if the Torah would have said Shtei Alechem, I would have said, what's the Lechem upon him? Why do you have to have so many places when the Torah tells you that it's Derech Shabbos and Tumah? Answers the Gemara, Tzvichi, you need all of them. And the Gemara makes a calculation why you wouldn't learn one from the other to all of them. Because Tomid. If the Torah would only say Tomid, I would have said, have him in a Tomid Shekain Todi v'Kolil. It happens every day, and it gets completely burnt on Mizbeach. So therefore, it's very, very important, and that's why it's Derech Shabbos and Tumah. Abo Pesach loy, but Pesach it doesn't happen every day, and it's not all burnt on Mizbeach. A lot of it is eaten by the owners, so therefore, it's not Derech Shabbos. Kamash Balot. So you wouldn't learn Pesach for common Tomid, because of Achmon Pesach and wouldn't say Tomid. Why won't I learn Tomid from Pesach if already Pesach is Derech Shabbos? And it doesn't come every day, and it doesn't go completely on the Mizbeach, and nevertheless it's Derech Shabbos. Tomid, which comes every day, should be Derech Shabbos. No, we say no, you can't learn. Why? Pesach shwanu shkoros. So you can't learn Pesach from Tomid from Pesach. Why can't you learn Pesach from Tomid? Because Tomid is every day, and you can't learn Tomid from Pesach because Pesach is Chayav Kos. Says the Gemara, okay, because Hani, just tell me those 2 and that's it. Both of them have got something very special. What? Tomid, Todiv, happens every day, gets a builders back. Pesach, Shonish Kos. Let's say, for example, the Omer or the Kabbalah of Rosh Chodesh, so we have to tell you also Yom Tov. Because I would have said, okay, those are very special because the korbanos that come on Yom Tov bring a kapod. Does anybody know what the Yomi korbanos in Kippur on Yom Tov come to Mechapa? Also easy. Very good. Tumas Mikdash v'Kadosh. Every Yom Tov and every Rosh Chodesh should bring a korban. It's all for Tumas Mikdash v'Kadosh. It's very strange. All for Tumah. They don't come to atone. They only come. Omer comes to permit what? What does the Omer come to permit? Chodosh. Very good. What does Shtei Alechem come to permit? What's the Shtei Alechem come to permit? No, what's the Shtei Alechem? Omer comes with Chodosh. What does Shtei Alechem permit? The Mizbeach to get Chodosh. You're not allowed to bring on the Mizbeach Chodosh to Shtei Alechem. In fact, we eat Chodosh from the second day Pesach. But the Mizbeach doesn't get Chodosh all the way till after Shavuos. Komash Malons, he needs it. Because each time you call them one for the other, this was Lechaper, this was coming to be Mate. Because only those because they come into the Hat. Komash Malon. So we need all of them. Tosis asks that he does work out that if the Torah would have said some of them without the others. We've got really 5. We've got Todi, we've got Tomit, Pesach, Yom Tov, and Omer V'Shtei Alechem, 4 categories. And the Gemara says each one can't be learned from the other. Tomid you can't learn from it because it's every day. Pesach because it's kos. Yom Tov because it's mechaper. Omer V'Shtei Alechem because it's coming to be matter. So you can't learn from the others. This goes into how you could perhaps learn a little bit, but we'll leave that. Now, here comes a cheshbon Gemara, and it's very important to keep track. Again, we have a few shilas. One of the shilas we have is Tumba Hutwa B'Tzibur or Dechuya B'Tzibur. It's a little bit similar to whether Pikuach Nefesh is a Hutwa B'Shabbos or Dochui B'Shabbos. It's a chakira, it's a machloikas, if Tumba Hutwa B'Tzibur or Dechuya B'Tzibur. Meaning like this. If all of us are Tommy, which we are, and the Shach would come, then tomorrow we would bring the korban Tomit, even though we're all Tommy. That's the halacha. The question is it hutva or dechuya? In simple English, hutva means it is permitted with happiness. Dechuya means it's reluctantly permitted. There has some halachic ramifications. For example, do you try your best to find Torah Kohanim or not? Another more important ramification is like this. The halacha is that when the Kohen Gadol used to wear the tzitz, one of the things that tzitz did was made that things which were tamei were okay. If you hold tumah hutra b'tzibur, you don't need the tzitz because Hashem is happy to permit tumah. If you say tumah dechuya b'tzibur, you need the tzitz. If you say tumah hutra b'tzibur, let me ask you the question. So then why do you need the tzitz? We just said if tumah hutra b'tzibur is permitted happily, you don't need the tzitz. Why would you need the tzitz? Anybody gives this answer, she gets a drink of hot water. My favorite drink. Come on, who can answer? It's not an easy question. I've just thrown at you a lot of new information. If you say tumah hutra b'tzibur, why would you need the tzitz? No, Levi, you are the wrong. If tumah hutra b'tzibur, why do you need the tzitz? We just said hutra with a joy. So why do you need the tzitz to be matzah tumah?
Because that needs to make it. It's got a dual purpose.
No, because that is for a yochid, not for a tzibur. For the individual, if by mistake the individual's korban became tomei, again, it's quite a lot of introductions, quite a lot. Okay. Now, we have another very, very complicated issue, which we had in Zvachim, so you should remember. And that is like this. When you have a korban, there are usually 3 parts to the korban. Blood that goes on the mizbeach, blood that you sprinkle on the mizbeach, a murim, what do you do with a murim? And they get burnt on the mizbeach. And the basar, that what happens to it? Kohanim or the owners eat. Get it very, very clear. It's mamish kedai to write this down. 3 parts. Blood that goes sprinkled on the mizbeach. A murim, we call it a murim, is the parts that go on the mizbeach to be burnt. That's the parts, the limbs, the fats, whatever you want to call them. It's not always fat, because sometimes it's the tail. No, it's not always the intestines. Each korban is slightly different. And finally, you've got the basar, which is eaten. There's a very, very big discussion to what happens if part of it goes wrong. Do you continue with the rest? This is a very complicated question. For example, you're about to sprinkle the blood, and the Kohen says to you, I'm very sorry to tell you, that all the limbs and all the meat, we're going to say limbs, what that goes to mizbeach, a moim, we'll stick to the words, we're stick to the words a moim, we're careful to remember. A moim is that which goes on mizbeach, Bosa is that which the owners of the Kohanim eat. Dam is what's sprinkled on the Mizbeach. The Kohen is about to sprinkle the dam. I'm very sorry to tell you, the Imurim and the Bosa, gone. What happened to them? Burnt by mistake, became tummy by mistake, took out of the Beis Hamikdash by mistake. They're gone. Should he sprinkle? What would you say? That is a very complicated question. On one hand, what's he sprinkling for? There's no carbon to talk about. On the other hand, the blood's okay. Nothing went wrong with the blood. Or let's say the other way around. The blood never got sprinkled. The blood spilled, became tummy. Somebody took it out of the Beis Hamikdash, got burnt, got lost. Now the question is, the Kohanim want to know, should I eat the bossa? Or the blood got lost, they said.
Yeah, I'm saying, you said the Zrika is the kafara.
You said that a few weeks ago. Let's stage. I didn't say it today. Did I just say it today?
No, a few weeks ago.
Ah, okay, fine. This is more complicated. Okay. I can't quote from yesterday. Daf Yomi, today's daf. No, Chashom. It's a good point. It is a very good point. We'll come to it. What happens if you're about to eat the meat? You're a Kohen, you're about to eat the meat, or you're Yisroel, you're about to eat the Shlomim. They said, they start telling you, the blood got spilt. So you've got part of the korban is not working. There are two levels to this question. You must remember there are 3 parts to every korban usually. Not every korban has 3 parts. Can you think of a korban that doesn't have 3 parts? Oila. Oh, very happy. Oila only has 2 parts. The blood on the Mizbeach, and the rest of it gets burnt to the Mizbeach. There's no 3 parts. Okay. But every korban usually has 3 parts, right? Okay. But Oila doesn't. It's very important to keep in track. In fact, can you tell me another thing that doesn't have 3 parts? Lechem Aponim doesn't have 3 parts. The Kohanim eat it and a bit goes on the Mizbeach. There's nothing that goes on the Mizbeach. There's no blood. And we've got Shtei Alechem that doesn't have 3 parts. And what did you say? You said something else. Mincha. Every mincha doesn't have 3 parts. No, the wine's not considered. The wine's not included. The wine has nothing to do with this. Again, every mincha, you take a kairos of Mizbeach. Now, whenever you've got a few parts, you've got to question what to do if part of it gets lost. Now, in the part getting lost, we have to differentiate between 2 kinds of getting lost. If you get the introduction clear, you should have the whole Gemara easier. There are 2 ways of getting lost, Levi. You're not listening. There are 2 ways of getting lost. One, it gets taken out to the Beis Hamikdash, or it gets burnt. That is considered lost totally. It's gone. It doesn't exist. It's burnt. It doesn't exist. But there's another way of getting lost. What's another way of getting lost? Tomei. Now there it depends on whether tumahuto b'tzibur, techuya b'tzibur, and whether there's a tzitz or whether there's no tzitz and lechatchila b'david. Why? Because when it becomes tomei, you can't say it's gone. It's perfectly fine. Let's say you're the Kohen. Now you're the Kohen. You're about to sprinkle the blood, and I come running up to you. Don't sprinkle the blood. Why? The imurim became tomei. So you say, I don't care about the imurim becoming tomei. Tumahuto b'tzibur, techuya b'tzibur. I'm very happy. I'll carry on. If I say to you the imurim got burnt, or they've got to go to Beis Hamikdash, now you've got a problem. This is the discussion we're going to be having. And the big discussion we're going to be having is, what does our Mishnah hold like? And mainly, does our Mishnah fit in with Shittas of Yeshua? Whenever we have Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Lezer, who do we pass like? Rabbi Yeshua. We never pass like Rabbi Lezer for 2 reasons. Even though the Gemara in Sanhedrin, I saw it today, the Gemara, you're thrown out to Beis Velish, there was a time of Beis Shammai. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says that Rabbi Lezer was the Rebbe of Rabbi Akiva, and he said to Rabbi Akiva that what you learned from me is less than 1 drop of the world's oceans. That's what Rabbi Akiva learned from Rabbi Lezer. And everything we know today is from Rabbi Akiva, because the Gemara says everything. So can you imagine how great Rabbi Lezer is? We can't even imagine, nothing we can imagine. He said, my 2 hands are like Sifrei Torah as he was dying. But Lemaisa, we never passed like it. So Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Lezer, we passed like Rabbi Yeshua. So we really would like to say our Mishnah is like Rabbi Yeshua, and the big problem is it doesn't fit in Rabbi Yeshua. But first, we go into great detail what they say, and then we see. Let's see slowly. If we don't get everything, the Yisroel at least are important to get clear. Let's see the Gemara. Savur. We're up to Ein Zayin Amud Aleph, about 1/3 from the bottom. It's 1 dot in my Gemara. Savur. Savur means that the people in the Beis Hamikdash learning thought the following piece of logic. Everybody agrees, and Rashi explains that everybody agrees, it just means our Mishnah holds. It's another way of saying our Mishnah holds that Tumah is the chuya b'tzibur, not hutu b'tzibur. What's the word chuya mean? It's only reluctantly permitted, and you need the tzitz. Why? Why do they think that? What made them think such a piece of logic? The answer is the lekatana de shomas de Tumah hutu b'tzibur Rabbi Yehuda. Only Rabbi Yehuda holds Tumah hutu b'tzibur, and therefore, since it's only Rabbi Yehuda, it's not mistaba. We should pass like Rabbi Yehuda. Tanya, how do you know Rabbi Yehuda holds such a thing? Tzitz meratza, bein sheyesh lana mitzchay, bein she'ena mitzchay meratza, divrei Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon holds whether the Kohen Gadol is wearing the tzitz or whether he's not wearing the tzitz has the ability to atone for tumah. I mean, the Kohen Gadol, we said before, what does the tzitz do? It atones for tumah. If something becomes tumah, you don't have to chuck it out. Why? You've got the tzitz. Says Rabbi Shimon, the Kohen Gadol doesn't need to wear the tzitz if it's in his cupboard. It has the same capabilities as if he's wearing it. Rabbi Yehuda, only while he's wearing it. So if the Kohen Gadol takes it off and he needs to go to sleep, he needs to go to the bathroom, and suddenly a carbon becomes tumah, according to Rabbi Yehuda, what are you going to do with that tumah thing? You're going to have to destroy it because it's not on his forehead. I'll prove you're wrong. On Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol did certain avodas inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim. When he did the certain avodas in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, what did he wear? Only the 4 white clothes. None of them were the tzitz. Now, how do we know that on Yom Kippur, if it's tumah, is things okay? That he didn't discuss, but it's obvious. Because in our Mishnah, we mentioned loads of things. So obviously, if things become tumah in Yom Kippur, it's okay. So now, if things on Yom Kippur are okay, even if they become tumah, even though some of the time he's not wearing the tzitz. Said Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon to Rabbi Yehuda, I don't understand you. You can't compare. I'm talking about a yochid that becomes tumah. You're talking about the tzibur. By tzibur, to mahuto b'tzibur, you don't need the tzitz. V'chlal, Rabbi Shimon Sava to b'tchuya b'tzibur, u'derekulam. Oh, so. That means Shimon holds to tchuya b'tzibur. Since it's tchuya b'tzibur, you need the tzitz. And since the Ma'is on Yom Kippur, the tzitz is not always worn, is a proof that what? That the tzitz has the power to atone, to be mechapa, without being worn. So the Bnei Yeshiva that learned our Mishnah, when they looked at our Mishnah, they understood that our Mishnah holds tumah the chuya hi b'tzibur, and you need the tzitz. That's the first assumption they made, like the first assumption. Or they made a new assumption. That means we said that sit is meratza on things becoming tummy. The Gemara at this stage understands it's only meratza on blood that becomes tummy, not on a murim and not on the basar that becomes tummy. Why? Because the tzitz is meratza on blood, because that needs to be sprinkled on the mizbeach. But that which is eaten either by human beings or eaten by the mizbeach, that's the basar or the murim, that the tzitz is not meratza. Why? Why would they say such a thing? Nobody holds tzitz meratza la'achilos ela Rabbi Lezer. And we do pass like Rabbi Lezer at the time. Rabbi Lezer tzitz meratza la'achilos, that tzitz is meratza on that which is eaten. The tzitz is not meratza la'achilos. Now that we've hold of these 2 introductions, introduction number 1, that tumah d'chuya b'tzibur, and you need the tzitz to be meratza. Introduction number 2, that the tzitz only does good things for the blood, but not for the basar and not for the imun. Therefore, I will prove to you, name a maslisa delek Rabbi Yeshua, that our mishnahs are fitting like Rabbi Yeshua. The Tanya. This is the 3rd step. The Torah says you should make your korban flesh and blood. Since the Torah mentions the 2 together in the same breath, says Rabbi Yeshua, mein dam, ein basar, ein dam. Listen to words of Rabbi Yeshua. Mein dam, ein basar, ein dam. If you've got no blood, forget about the flesh. You've got no flesh, forget about the blood. So according to Rabbi Yeshua, if I come running up to the Kohen and I say to him, I'm very sorry to tell you, before you sprinkle the blood, the basar's gone, what would the Kohen do? Chuck it. Very good. Chuck out the blood. There's nothing to do. Mein dam, ein basar, ein dam. Alternatively, if the Kohen's about to eat the basar and I say to him, I'm very sorry to tell you, the blood is spilt, what would you do? Can't eat the basar. Very good. Rabbi Lezer, no. Half he agrees, half he doesn't agree. Dam, afavishen basar. You can do the blood even if there's no basar. Why? It just says pour out the blood on the mizbeach without mentioning anything about the basar. Again, according to Rabbi Yeshua, you need both. One without the other doesn't work. You don't sprinkle the blood unless there's basar. You don't eat the basar unless you've sprinkled the blood. You need both. Rabbi Lezer disagrees. He says, blood without basar you can have. Basar without blood you can't have. Oh, the Torah mentions the both in the same breath. The fact that it mentions them in the same breath is mashma that they have the same halacha. He learns from it a completely different halacha. The halacha is like this: that the way you would put the basa onto the fire, how would you put basa on the mizbeach? How would you put limbs on the mizbeach? You throw them onto the mizbeach, right? Because you can't. What? Nothing is I say even better. Just like the blood, the way you put the blood on the mizbeach is you throw it. So too the basa has to be thrown on the fire. And from here we learn that there was a gap between the ramp and the mizbeach. When the kohen would go up the ramp, there was an air space between the ramp and the mizbeach. It's very interesting. Tesis holds that the gap space was close to an amma, which is quite big, about 6 centimeters. The kohen would have to jump. Rashi says it was the size of a hair. Very, very small. But it's machlokas. Tesis points out that you didn't need the gap because at the end of the day, all you need to do was to throw the meat onto the mizbeach, and you could just stand without a gap. So if you look at Tesis says they had to have it in order to remind them. If there would be no air gap, the kohen might walk all the way up to the fire and put it in. Therefore, you had to have an air gap. Again, Rabbi Shiur learns from the fact that it says boss of a dam to tell you that without bossa there's no dam, without dan there's no boss. Rabbi Lezer says no. Boss of a dam teaches you something else. What does boss of a dam teach you? That there's a space. There's a window, air space between the two. Just like the blood you throw, the boss you throw. Oh. Now the Gemara is going to go in detail to discuss the machlekes of Lezer and Shiur, how they explain the psukim which they both darshaned according to other person's opinion. But the bottom line from Rabbi Shiur is what? That if there's no bossa, there's no dam. Let's go back to our Mishnah for 1 minute. In our Mishnah, we said that if you've got, let's say, the zivchei shal mitzibur, the zivchei shal mitzibur become tamei, you can't eat them. So what are you going to do to them? You're going to destroy them. According to Rabbi Shiur, if there's no bossa, there's no dam. So therefore, what are you going to do? You're not going to sprinkle the blood. So how can the Mishnah say that you're going to bring a korban onto a bit? Mishnah, according to Rabbi Lezer, you can sprinkle the blood, be yotzi your korban, so don't eat it. According to Rabbi Shiur, you're not going to eat it because it's tummy. Now, if you would hold, for example, that tumohut to a betzibur, and you don't need the tzitz, then since you don't need the tzitz, the halacha would be that we would consider that the bossa is like its toy. But it's only because you hold to dechuya betzibur, and therefore you need the tzitz. And the tzitz doesn't have any power over the meat. It only has power over the blood. So it's only the blood that becomes mutter. So the only thing which you're going to bring on the mizbeach is the blood. But Rabbi Shiur holds you don't bring blood alone at all. I want to say it once more to get it very, very clear. If you hold that the tumor hutu betzibur, you don't need the tzitz. If you don't need the tzitz, therefore the boss and the dam is tummy, we don't care. Because then they tumor hutu betzibur, you've got boss, you've got dam, and you can sprinkle the blood, and the boss is fine, and it's okay. But if you hold tumor dechuya betzibur, you need the tzitz. The tzitz only has power to be meratz on blood, not on meat. Since it has no ability to matz on bossa, so therefore it's as if you've got no meat. If you've got no meat, you're sprinkling blood without meat. And that's just to be sure that he holds you not allowed to sprinkle blood without meat. So therefore our mission is not like a Bishua. Now the Gemara is going to go for some time to discuss a blessed Bishua, and then later the Gemara is going to try and answer how the mission does fit in the Kodesh Bishua. Rabbi Shiur, oh, what's he do with the pasuk which says you should pour out the blood, which is mashma like Rabbi Lezer, that what? You pour the blood even though there's no bossa, because the pasuk there doesn't say a word about bossa. The next few words is says the Gemara. If that's the case, top of Ayin Zayin and Beis, that according to Rabbi Shiur, the second pasuk also tells you that you need both, and one without the other doesn't work. Why do you have to have two psukim to tell you that you need the bossa and the dam? Answers more chad ba'olam. One by oila, one by shlomim. But you need both. If the Torah only tell you by oila that you need both parts, since oila is chamur, because all of it goes in this beach, that's why we say dam without boss and boss without dam doesn't work. Because it's got two kinds of eating. Eating of the owners, eating of this beach. That's why blood without boss doesn't work. So according to Rabbi Shiur, we have two psukim to tell you that you need bossa and dam. One is it says bossa v'adam. The Torah says meat and blood together. And another pasuk it says, since the Torah tells us both together, therefore the Torah is teaching us that what? That you need to have all of it, that you need to have both, and one without that doesn't work. The Gemara asks the question, if that's the case, why do we need two psukim? One for Oila, one for Shlomim. Oila is more chomo, it's completely burnt in Mizbeach. Shlomim is more chomo, it's got two kinds of achilas, and that's why we need both. It says the Gemara, it does say they should eat the basa, which is mashma that one is dependent on the other. That means, not that without meat there's no blood, without blood there's no meat. No. But when there is blood, you're not allowed to eat the meat until the blood is sprinkled. That means even Rabbi Lezer agrees that even though one is not dependent on the other, but when there is both, you're not allowed to eat your korban until the blood is sprinkled. Furthermore, maybe that's all the pasuk coming to teach you. How did the pasuk coming to teach you this other halacha which you said before? How do you know this other halacha that you can have blood without basa? Because Rabbi Lezer learns from the pasuk. How does he know it? The pasuk changes it around. If you look carefully in the pasuk, it says you should do. What's mentioned first? Meat or blood? Basa. Basa v'adam. Basa then dam. And then the pasuk finishes off. V'dam zvochecha yishofech, pour the blood and then do the korban. That doesn't make any sense. Why the first time do you mention the meat and the second time you mention the last? Answers the Gemara. Again, just like it says the first time, meat and blood. Why do you mention the blood first? The answer is that the Torah wants to tell us two different halachas. One, the Torah wants to teach you that you should pour the blood even if you've got no basa left. And that the Torah could have said it, and the Torah didn't need to say without basa teichel to tell you that you're only allowed them. The fact that Torah says basa teichel to tell you you're not allowed to eat the meat until you've actually sprinkled the blood. That's one halacha. But the Torah could have said it the other way around to teach you that you can have blood without basa, and it doesn't matter if there's no basa. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Shua and the how does Rabbi Shua really know that meat cannot be eaten until the blood is sprinkled? He learns it from a kavachema. It's ancient kavachema. That's the limbs that go on his beach. If they don't exist, if they get destroyed, you can still eat the meat. But ki isnu, when they do exist, the halacha is that when there's limbs that go on the mizbeach, you first put the limbs on the mizbeach, then you eat the meat. If there's no limbs, it doesn't matter. If there's no blood, everybody agrees you can't eat the meat. Because even Rabbi Lezer agrees you can't eat the meat unless there's blood. He say when it's there, of course it's na'akev. We actually learned it about 20 daf ago. The Torah says that you should put everything on the mizbeach and then basa teicha, which we learned that you first have to do the limbs and then the basa eat them. So from there we learned that the limbs are ma'akev before the things. Therefore, also what I did, we do a kavachim of the blood. So even though we can learn from kavachim, the pasuk says it. If we can darshan, we prefer to darshan. So let's say, so far the Gemara has just explained to us how we learn the drashas. Again, Rabbi Shua holds without basa there's no dam, without dam there's no basa. And he learns it from the fact that the Torah says, from the latter half of the pasuk, which says, from that, he learns that shlomim as well, you need both. And he says that the Torah says it twice. How does he know that you can't eat the basa until the dam is sprinkled? Very good. That's how Rabbi Shua goes through those three stages. Rabbi Lezer says, look, basa v'dam tells you that what? That you have to have a space, you have to toss. The fact that pasuk finishes off a basa teichel tells us two halachas. One halacha is that you can't eat the meat until you sprinkle the blood. And the second thing is to tell you that that it says that blood without basa also works. Because it says that blood without basa works, and the basa of a dam tells you have to toss it. And from the second of the pasuk, he learns two things. One is that you can have blood without meat, and that you can't eat the meat until you've actually sprinkled the blood. That is how we've learned it. So now, says the Gemara, going back to our original thing. The question is, do we stop here? It's a long daf tomorrow as well. And we learn the fact that eventually we catch up, or because it's only been an hour. What do you think? What does anyone prefer? You know what? We'll stop here because we've done quite a lot. We'll stop here, and it might take a couple of days till we actually get to the thing. It doesn't matter. I mentioned before, Avi Pesachim is a very, very lot of short daf. It's one of them mamish tiny. That's okay. So we'll do a lot of halacha l'maisa, but we're stopping over here. We're up to Hashta, second line down of the second of the white lines Amud Beis. Have a very, very good vach. Good vach.